War is the most terrible event in the life of every person, especially for children, because during hostilities they are the most defenseless. Death laid in wait for them during constant bombardments, being shacked up in concentration camps, living in ghettos, and suffering from hunger and trying to stay warm in freezing temperatures during the winter months. Children's mentalities were traumatized by the loss of loved ones, terrible scenes of brutality on the part of the occupants, many hardships and constant fear and danger. Children who grew up during the times of war were very different from others because they had no childhood. Some did not get a decent education, others did not feel the love of their parents, and others had to struggle every day to survive. It is no accident that children of the war are called adults with children's eyes. Many Ukrainian and foreign writers wrote about the topic of the military destiny of children, though historians seemed to bypass this topic. The theme children and the war for a long time was very little studied and unexplored, because it is such an anti-war theme. There is a concept in military totalitarian societies that the war concerned only a soldier, an adult man, who would be willing to go to war on the front. In fact, it is children, civilians, who don't participate in hostilities and don't resist the opposition who are the least protected.
Діти, цивільні люди, які не беруть участь у бойових діях, які
While most of the broad pictures of the fate of children during the war are more or less known, according to statistics, the situation is quite different. The reason being that children were not taken into account in the statistics of the losses among the civilian population, nor in the statistics of those who perished.
Ні в серед статистики втрат цивільного населення, ні в статистиці загиблих.
In the absence of complete and unbiased information about children's destinies during World War II, on the initiative of Kyiv citizen Anastasia Huley, German and Ukrainian scientists collected memories of the war of 29 Ukrainian and German people who survived the horrors of World War II. Soon they will be published in the book Children of War, in the Ukrainian and German languages.
Diese Biografien beschreiben Geschichten von Menschen, die in ein ganz schweres
These are biographies of people who were born in very difficult times. They didn't see anything in their childhood except terrible camps and such slave conditions.
Das sie führten in Lagern, in Kriegssituationen, in Bombennächten. Für mich ist das anrührend und bewegend, und ich weiß, dass das Land, aus dem ich komme, diesen Krieg in
All people who worked on this book, including editors and proofreaders, translators, read the biographies crying.
Und es in Bildung umzusetzen.
This is to a certain extent a scholastic discovery, and I have never seen such a book, at least in all my years of scholastic practice. In one book you can read not only one story of life. They are similar, though at the same time they are somewhat different. We presented such a wide range of biographies that I can't single out anyone. This is the basis of the richness of this joint work. These are different stories from different points of view. But I think it will be very interesting for German readers to hear the opinions of Ukrainian people who lived in great suffering and became victims of this war. At the same time, Ukrainian readers can learn new stories about Germans, who can honestly admit how keen they were about National Socialism when they were members of Hitler Youth or the girls were members of Nazi youth organizations. We're trying to find out why and how exactly this phenomenon transpired.
Sich damit zu beschäftigen und dem Glossar nachzuschauen, was war das eigentlich damals, was diese Kinder so unterschieden hat.
Collected by German and Ukrainian scholars, the stories of teenagers, first of all, tell us about the ideological pressure and influence that these children were under.
Вони дають певний зріз тогочасного суспільства.
From the Ukrainian side, on the one hand, it was the desire to join the pioneers, while on the other hand, it was the repression that the family had went through and survived. And of course, this was a drama and tragedy, when one didn't end, but another began, namely the war and the occupation.
І інше насильство. Так само і німецькі історії вони розповідають, як звичайний процес, коли
The Germans tell us how they were obliged to go to military service in one place, in another, in agriculture, when they entered the Hitler Youth Organization. By the same token, there are stories where this was viewed in a negative sense, that they were sold to the state.
де розповідається, що в негативному сенсі, що ми були продані державі.
Both totalitarian states actively used child labor in preparation for war and during the war itself. They were attracted to work, patriotic or compulsory, depending on which side had this territory in its possession. Today, it is well known that there was compulsory labor on the occupied territory of Ukraine. There was a mass export of children from the age of 14 to forced labor in the Third Reich.
Території України з 14 років була обов'язкова праця, масове вивезення на примусову працю до Третього Рейху.
By the way, according to statistics, how did the workers from the former Soviet republics and the territory of Ukraine differ? There were a lot of women and underage and people who are under the age of 17 to 18, unlike foreign workers from France and Holland, where most skilled workers were men.
На відміну від робітників іноземців там з Франції, з Голландії, де це переважно були кваліфіковані чоловіки.
Adolescents who were forcibly exported to work in Germany were raised by the Stalin system. They either refused to work for the enemy or escaped with the hope of finding their way home. For this, they were sent to a concentration camp. A Ukrainian girl named Anastasia Huley had such a cruel destiny. For her escape, she was sent to the German concentration camp Auschwitz. When the Soviet army was approaching, all those who remained alive were sent to other concentration camps in Germany. Anastasia was in the Nazi concentration camp Bergen-Belsen, which in April 1945 was liberated by British troops. This was yet another tragedy that was proven. In fact, children who grew up, 17 years old and even earlier 16-year-old, were called to action. They had no right even for documents by all the regulations and standards. Those who did not fight were forced to go to the second-line areas. They were sent to the Privolzhsky military district, the Moscow military district in early 1943, then after liberation to Kharkiv and Kiev military districts for training. But no one agreed to this and did not want to be involved in this. As such, very many children simply died. In order to preserve the number of the Aryan nation, during World War II, Ukrainian children lived in German families in order to naturalize them. It happened so with the Ukrainian girl Tamara Mish and her younger brothers. Their parents were killed and the children were sent to live in a German family. After the war ended, the German foster parents abandoned the Ukrainian children to the mercy of fate, and that is exactly how they ended up in an orphanage. It is her biography that tells about how cruel racial ideas were and the racial laws that the Nazi regime brought to occupied Ukraine, which completely changed their lives.
Цих дітей намагалися онімечити, розлучили їх, змінили їм імена.
They made all attempts to Germanize these Ukrainian children, separated them and changed their given names and surnames. They tried to find some information about who they were. Probably in addition to the physical injuries, this was a moral trauma. It included the loss of parents, the loss of their family, and the search for themselves. Attempts to combine these excerpts of children's images, which they remembered from their childhood, it is perhaps one of the largest dramas of the war.
Це, можливо, одна з найбільших таких драм війни.
I know that the history of search for such information was not always successful. Very often the facts remained unclear.
Так і залишаються нез'ясованими.
A lot of children lost their parents and relatives during the war. In addition to death, except for diseases, children's orphan life became a huge problem after the war. Half of the orphans were in a situation where one of the parents died or both died, meaning the children were left without their nearest relatives. There are data showing that in December 1944, in Ukraine, there were 125,000 orphans registered. And it's not a fact that they all received state assistance as they were in orphanages. They simply were on the register list and lived on the street or with some distant relatives. After the war, everyone went along their different paths in life. After the hostilities end, the key issue for such children was survival without housing, food and clothing. All the children years of these children formed a certain level of stress in them, a certain struggle for survival and a struggle for life. Given this, there was no longer an issue of any personal ambitions. The only matters were that the family was alive, the brothers and sisters finished school, and the elementary issue of survival.
Якісь елементарні питання виживання і навіть дуже рідко ставлять якісь.
Very rarely were their ambitions to get an education, a career, and to achieve the realization of their desires. Very few heroes of our book talk about their own ambitions. Most of them are just talking about survival. Perhaps this is the horror of this phenomenon, children of war.
І в цьому, мабуть, жах цього питання дітей війни.
But it was more difficult for Ukrainian children to survive after the war. If in Germany the Nazi regime was overthrown and international aid came to restore it, then in the Soviet Union only women and grown-up teens solved their personal problems on their own without assistance. It is Ukrainian biographies that tell more about a hard post-war time. As everything was destroyed, they lost family members, and these experiences remain in their minds to the present day. This is very noticeable in these stories. Our German heroes of the book also couldn't completely get rid of these memories, and they, through the prism of their personal biography, raised this topic. Someone founded a non-government organization, others took a more scholarly approach, and some set out looking for their family. In any case, it resulted in their taking a civil position to prevent such events from happening today. As the researchers testify, the war left an indelible imprint on the memories of children of that time. In addition to that, their experiences left a similar stain on their entire future life. However, all this didn't harden their souls.
Ja, besonders zu Herzen gehend, dass wir aus dem Land.
I always meet with witnesses of those events, and we're always amazed at how easily they extended a hand of reconciliation.
Es ist, miteinander zu sprechen, sich auszutauschen.
In fact, I was amazed and continue to be amazed by the sense of love in these people's lives. Their love for life, their desire to create and communicate. These memories are very difficult, but at the same time, for these people, it is also their opportunity to feel as part of a great story.
Для цих людей це їх можливість відчути себе частиною великої історії. Також. Тобто вони долучились через цю драму і трагедію.
That is, they have joined through this drama and tragedy to a great story, and perhaps this fills their life with meaning, because they saw the dark side of this life and what it can be in the negative sense. Therefore, they have this optimism, and they find optimism in their present-day lives.
Знаходять позитив в сучасному їхньому житті.
The generation of those whose childhood and youth coincided with the fatal years of the 1940s that witnessed the human tragedy is today at an advanced age. But even today, these people are distinguished by the wisdom and resilience of character, love for their native country, and faith in the power of good. The theme of war on children during the war remains quite relevant in the 21st century. With their memories and thoughts, they try to explain to humanity how dangerous such events are for future generations.